This is Homie and the Dude, the father and son MMA and TTRPG podcast, and destination for the best NPCs across all of the planes. You're watching D&D Diaries today. And
Wait. How do you usually say
it? D&D Diaries. We're watching D&D Diaries today, and today's a fun one. We're talking about the uses of playing your game in a sandbox world as opposed to playing it in a more linear kind of style. And just how that can be helpful in some ways, and the pros of playing in sandbox and the cons of kind of playing in sandbox, and kind of talk about how that ends up and talk about it from a DM's and a player's perspective as well. So for me, I find that sandbox is really a really great way to really immerse your players, because you can keep the world alive around them while they make their own decisions. And it makes them really feel immersed in a place that's active and alive and moving around them while they're also making decisions. But that's just one small aspect of sandboxing, from the DM's perspective at least. There's mountains of different reasons why you would do a sandbox and why you could do a sandbox. But I want to ask you more, what do you enjoy about playing a sandbox? Because we've done it where, as I've progressed, I've played some pretty linear stuff for you guys, and we've also done a lot of like more open sandbox, open world kind of stuff. What is it about that you've enjoyed or not enjoyed when I've done that? Yeah,
so as I've evolved as a player, I think my preference is to role play, to have enough space to interact with other players, to get a little bit of the nuance of those interactions. And I feel like when we aren't sandboxing, when we're clipping forward on a mission, getting closer to whatever the bad guy is, or whatever the eventual objective is, there's less room, there's less space. And I really am starting to find that I enjoy the space a little bit more. And so I think a sandbox allows for just, walking down a road and being like, so tell me a little bit more about yourself. I got a little bit when we met in the bar, but what's your story?
Yeah.
That type of thing,
I agree with you in that. It feels like when you're clipping along with plot, that is the main thing. Everyone's worried about, what information do we need for the next thing? What do we need to know? What do we need to do? Where do we need to be? Who do we need to meet? That kind of thing. As opposed to, like you said, getting to know each other and forming bonds and stuff. Which is why downtime is a really important part of it. But also having that ability to, meander away from main plot every now and then through a sandbox is really, really important. And I agree with you entirely. It opens that up massively.
I also think, it just allows for, and this is a preference for some players and not for others. For me, I do feel like I want to be creative. I want to be, if I want to be silly, and I want to, go to get my shoes mended or find some try to investigate how I can fix my sword or get some new costume or whatever. I want to go play a game in the park. It just feels like I can allow that playfulness to come out a little bit more and not feel as constrained as a non-sandbox environment.
I would agree with that, and also it also allows you to find plot in places you don't find. Something Tom and I were talking about leading up to this episode is, how when you run a sandbox, it can either be kind of stagnant because your players aren't really finding much plot, and they've opened a bakery and are just running the bakery day in and day out. And don't get me wrong, some shenanigans happen at the bakery, but through and through, it can be that can be quite a boring situation. So
there's a balance, isn't there?
100%, and I think, it's one of those things though where if your players want to make a sandbox, a really amazing campaign and a really amazing plot, they will seek out, interesting NPCs. So if they're like, oh, we need work, they might be like, oh, maybe we'll go ask the criminals, or, maybe we'll go ask the guards, see if they need anyone, and then they join the Imperial Guard and they get sound, it allows for, if you have players that are really keen and really interested and aren't so much wanting to be led, that's another thing. If you have players that are really almost alphas, players that are very good at making decisions and good at choosing things, which not all players are. Some are more passive and are happy to go with the consensus or be led a little bit more by the DM. However, if you have really strong players, it's often a really good way to do it because they will seek out that overarching plot that exists in this world by just searching out those things, those people in the world and interacting with things.
It's almost like the fringes of maybe the actual main plot are areas that at times, if it is too directed, we don't have time to explore, secondary or third level characters. But so I think it's also important just to define, when I think of sandbox, I think both sort of like geographically, but also elements of that are in, how driven the plot is. And so I do think sandbox can include and should include a very strong narrated plot behind the scenes. There has to be some sort of objective, I think, or else we can dick around for sessions and sessions, and that can be kind of end up being overly silly.
I agree with you. And it's about keeping the world alive. While if the players are happy to just open a bakery, well, what does that mean if this empire has started a war with this empire, and this is going on, what kind of contention has that got? For example, in our world, there's a lack of water, and parts of the vegetation and like stuff that humanoids need to survive, food and stuff like that, is starting to disappear. So if the players did just own a bakery, and whatever, who knows how soon they would start seeing the effects of the rest of the world reaching their doorstep. It's one of those things of like, the Western world has never seen like war on their doorstep, kind of thing. It's one of those, you don't clock it until it's there. So yeah, don't get me wrong, you can have your players play in a bakery and have some fun, and like I said, you can have mimics in the bakery, you could have people attack you could have ghosts haunting the bakery, whatever, you could make it a really fun freaking bakery for your players. But eventually the stuff that's going on in the real world, like for most of us, will eventually affect you in some sort of way, whether that's a political move, a new law that's passed, a pandemic, for example. There's a mountain of different things that means that your players would then have to maybe consider moving into action or changing their course a little bit, and moving towards some sort of plot if they are stagnating a little bit in a sandbox world. But also, the reason I also really love sandbox for players is because it really allows the players to build as well. Like in some cases, if a DM is happy to allow players, and this is not the case for every DM, some Dungeon Masters, and we play with one who has a world that's been built and he knows every corner of that world, so us building stuff and adding things isn't always an option. Where for my world, I like to leave some things open and the players be able to create and devise their own ideas and build some of it with me, and I think it ends up becoming a much more immersive and enthralling experience for the players because they've felt like it's something they own. Do you know what I mean? They become connected to, this place, the library that Lauren went to that was built for her, basically. I built it there on the spot. I improvised it, though it was in the city and it existed for hundreds of years before Lauren's character got there.
Yeah.
I built that library for her, and, I asked her, she was asking me, I think I can see a restricted section in the back, and I'm like, oh, can you? Okay, yeah, there's
yes,
a sign,
yeah.
and like, so it's one of those things where, it's okay to allow your players to build stuff and grow because it will allow them to feel a little bit more connected with the world, especially if they're in a world where they can make all the decisions as well. It makes them feel even more in control of kind of what's going on in their direct vicinity.
Yeah, I would add as well, as I'm playing more, I'm starting to get this hypersensitive, I call it my anti-railroading radar. When I feel like I'm getting railroading and I feel like it's getting more and more sensitive, like it is something that's going on in my brain, and I'm like, I don't, like, I'm pushing back on it a little bit, not like within the game, but inside of me, I'm like, oh, here we go, I'm getting a little bit railroaded here, and I'm not enjoying this as much. And sandbox, if it's structured as an open sandbox, then that takes away that anti-railroading radar, which is becoming, I think, for me, a little bit of an issue when it's too much railroading, and I just feel like
there's no options.
Yeah, dude, we're marching toward a defined, like,
death.
Predetermined, like, sometimes it's already predetermined whether you may live or die. Like, it literally can feel like that, and it's a little bit like a death march. So with the sandbox, that just removes all of that, and it feels like I have little bit more control, a little bit more autonomy of my existence of
Yeah.
what I want to do.
So there's loads of benefits to running a sandbox. It allows for wide creativity. It allows for the DM to really flex their improvisation. It allows you to have a really active world that is moving around your players. It allows the players to seek out the adventure that they want, as opposed to the idea of an adventure that you have as a DM that you think they might want. They will go and find the adventure that they want a lot of the time in the sandbox. So that's a really great way to do it. However, there are some things that kind of running sandbox can fall short of sometimes as well, and it's important to also address those with you guys so that you at least understand for when you're deciding what game you want to run at your table. So, you know, some of the things that I definitely think are play against, you know, running a sandbox world is the fact that, you know, it's not the best for a stream. If you wanted to do a live stream that has some more serious themes and undertones and stuff, and it can sometimes get a bit stagnant in streams, and it can end up feeling a bit like grinding the gears because not much is happening. And often, Tom and I have really found out that with streams, a plot is what draws viewers in. And if you don't have a strong plot and a strong thing to follow, that's why people lose interest in Critical Role for episodes and episodes at a time, is because they feel like some of the downtimes or bits and bobs end up losing a bit of the traction, and it kind of depletes a little bit. So it's that feeling of like, I don't think sandboxes, not that they're not good for a stream, because if you tailor it right and you have the right table and you have the right DM,
Exactly.
it can be perfect for a stream. But I would say, if I were to speak generally, it's not the best. I wouldn't say it's not. Saying it's not the best is vague. I would say it's good when you have the right conditions for it. That's what I'm trying to say. Within the right conditions, a sandbox can be good for a stream, but typically it's hard to amalgamate all those perfect conditions for that, is what I guess I'm trying to say.
I'll give you an example. When I think of watching a stream, I feel like I'm being entertained, right? I feel like the equivalent of watching a movie or a sitcom or something like that. So some sitcom situations, if they aren't driven by some sort of directive, some sort of main idea, some sort of topic for the sitcom, can feel a little bit slow, feel a bit less, poppin' for that episode or whatever. There are some exceptions though. So I'm thinking of Seinfeld, which was the underlying sort of premise of Seinfeld is we're not gonna fucking have anything going on. It's just a bunch of people kind of hanging out, and to some extent,
Friends.
Well, yeah, Friends, and I was also How I Met Your Mother has an element of that as well. The reason those work, though, is because you have a cast
that grows and changes,
and their interactions are just so rich. So, unless you can capture a cast like that in a stream,
that's a good point.
You may run into a situation where you have a lot of dead time, or a lot of people just it just feels like there's very large elements of ebb and flow, and a lot more ebb than flow. And that's what you need to be concerned about, I think, with a sandbox when you're streaming.
I would 100% agree with that. I think that's a really, really good analogy and way to put it of, you need a strong cast to then elevate that sandbox kind of feel. And the other thing, you also need people who want to explore. Like, if your players aren't explorers, if they're not people that enjoyed the pillar of exploration in D&D, as they call the three pillars, if they're not that group, then they're not going to enjoy a sandbox, because sandbox is truly about exploring and getting to know the world around you and experiencing the place that you exist in, as opposed to living through a plot and existing for a plot. Do you know what I mean?
And I think it's important not to be like sandbox snobs. Like, whatever your table is, it is, right?
Yeah.
And so you craft a game and an environment and a setting and an experience.
It might be a mix of the two. It might be sandbox and not sandbox. It might be a healthy combination of the two as well.
Yeah, and if your players strive and excel and blossom in combat, well then, why try to make them into something they're not? Like, maybe you try to, you offer little stretching opportunities, but if that's
some puzzles,
their core,
a little bit of role play interaction stuff. Here's the thing that I would say is you've got to keep it varied, but with what Tom's saying is really accurate. When you do a sandbox, you have to make sure that it suits the table. It's a big, important thing to discuss with the table before you run the game of, do you guys want this to be something where you are completely open and making all the fully completely open world kind of thing, or whether you want to have some sort of plot that I run, basically some sort of adventure that we're running, a campaign. And I think, like we've said, there's definitely pros, there's definitely cons to it. I think also some of the other things are things like your players can become just directionless. We've kind of mentioned that. We've talked about, loss of momentum and stagnation when it comes to sandbox is often a common occurrence that happens. And I'm not sure whether that comes down to lack of players wanting to, go out and do things, or that comes down to a DM not having enough ideas, or running out of ideas, burning out of ideas for one section of the world that maybe the players are staying in and not going further from, and stuff like that. So I think it really does then come down to whether or not that ends up going well, like we've come back to, is the table in itself.
I'll give you another good analogy. So let's say, for example, in our sandbox world, we're on an island. And we don't know what's going on in the rest of the world. So we're just screwing around on the island. We surf, we do whatever, we do barbecues. But the rest of the world has been created that there is climate change, right? And there's shit happening. As soon as we discover that setting is imposing itself on us, then we may be either forced or choose to take action on that. And so, you want to feel free, but also I think from a DM's perspective, you want to create an environment where there is additional, whether it's political or some other driving energy it's
a world that's alive.
Yeah.
That's what you got to think about, is this is an organism. Your world is not a thing on a piece of paper. It's something that will change actually through time. For example, I love, recently Matt Mercer released The History of Exandria. A lovely little video that talks about, all the stuff that he's written from the beginning of stuff before the players were there through to, the first campaign, the second campaign, and now in the third campaign. And it's across, X amount of years. And I just really like that the world changed a lot. Things have changed. Kingdoms have risen. Empires have fallen. Dictators have taken over and then crumbled. And, it's standard things that happen in the real world. And I think that is how you make a sandbox feel alive. And it will also not force your players, but encourage them to seek out some more of the world. If there is things like, political stuff happening, wars, climate issues, weather things,
natural occurrences,
natural disasters, gods intervening with things, devils and stuff, the Fey wilds, the elemental planes, all this stuff could be, dependent on how it interacts with your world, could affect those players in the situation that they're in. So, it's one to consider. Also, your players just being in the wrong place at the wrong time is always a fun way to start a little bit of plot for them. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, you bump into this and it just so happens you're in the middle of a mass trial and this is going on and you just stumbled into the wrong building at the wrong time kind of thing, So what I guess we've come to at the end of this episode is basically...
there's no preference, is there?
No.
I mean, it's whatever fits.
What
and also,
suits your table?
Also, balance, I think, is important.
Yeah.
If you're a sandbox person, great. That's awesome. Just make sure you keep balanced on all the other things to consider. If you're not a sandbox person, that's cool as well. But just, consider, some players in some games don't thrive on just combat, after mission after mission. So,
after roleplay, after roleplay, after roleplay. Yeah, it needs to have it needs to be, laced in with some creative exploration for the players. But yeah, guys, we hope this has helped you kind of think about whether or not to use a sandbox kind of world setting in your home game or your stream game. We use a good mixture. Legitimately, I use a healthy mixture at this point of heavy plot with sandbox for the players. If they wanted to leave the plot that I've currently got them on and do something else, they're more than welcome to. But I also know the players that we have at the table enjoy the main plot that's going on right now, so they're trekking forward with kind of the main plot. Though they go and investigate and explore things, they very much are moving forward with the main plot because it's what you guys want to do. But if you guys wanted to open something else, we're also at a place where you definitely can, and I'm at a place where I'm comfortable enough as a DM to be like, sure, you don't want to do that?
And
okay, we'll see what happens in the background while things are going on,
It would inform us on other parts of our world,
yeah.
Right? So if you want to go bump into some other stuff, okay, well, now we're going to have to really get down to, if it hasn't been made, creating all the different aspects of that other stuff that you are going to be living in.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Homie and the Dude. We're a father and son TTRPG and MMA podcasting team. We also make NPCs. We have a bunch of free ones that you can use in your game, as well as a bunch of ones that you can plug and play. Now, The awesome thing about our NPCs is when we make the stat blocks, they work amazing as they're single NPCs. They have incredible unique features that we have invented for each character that are tailored specifically to them and their appearance and their abilities. But furthermore, when you buy a pack of our NPCs, their abilities work in a synergistic way in of that you can combine abilities to create even more powerful ways to go at your players or assist your players during combat and roleplay interactions and things like that. So if you'd like to, check out our website. It's homieandthedude.com. Other than that, subscribe to the YouTube, follow us on Twitter. Best way to interact with us. We'll see you guys in the next one. Father and son, homie and dude.
See ya.
Later.
We're out.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching Homie and the Dude today. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit us with the Holy Trinity. Go follow us on Twitter, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and like the Facebook. It's the best way that you can help us out at the moment. Hope you have an awesome day. Thanks for watching, guys.